And then you also get any conservatives who didn't vote for Trump. Like I remember when Nikki Haley was running, he says, anyone who votes for Nikki Haley is out of MAGA forever. So here's the list of people we don't like. The left, anything that smacks of big government, other countries, immigrants, minorities, the poor, any conservatives who didn't vote for Trump. So what you have left is the people who voted for Trump. Those are the only good, smart, intelligent people. And so you've made an us and them, and the them is like literally the entire rest of the world who doesn't think the way you do about this guy has taken over our country. It's wild. It is crazy.
And again, this, just to bring it back to our theme, when we get accused of Trump derangement syndrome, what I'm trying to point out and what you're trying to point out here is that there are very real concerns that we have, and to point them out is not deranged. It's actually, and the main concerns that I'm focusing in on today, and some of the questions I'm asking you, have to do with these things about how it's changing the very character of the people who support Trump. Welcome to the Culture, Faith, and Politics podcast. I'm Pat Kahnke, and I'm here once again with my good friend and a friend of the channel, Adam Swenson. So, hey, Adam.
Hey, Pat.
Yeah, good to see you. Today, we're going to be talking about Trump derangement syndrome, and Adam got accused of it the other day, and I get accused of it pretty much every day. And we figure a lot of our listeners probably get accused of the same sort of nonsense. So today, what we want to do is want to talk about it a bit, talk about several categories of things that feel important to us, that things that led both of us to change our voting patterns once Donald Trump came on the scene. We want to talk about what makes Trump different than any other politician and why it's important to us to oppose him and his movement, because we don't think that those concerns are deranged at all. We think they're deal breakers. And a lot of them, I think, are going to live on beyond Trump. So we got to talk about it. Now, Adam writes on Substack at Friendly Neighborhood Philosopher. And he's got a podcast by the same name, Friendly Neighborhood Philosopher. And you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. So welcome, Adam. Let's get into this. I want to start by just having you tell us your story about how recently you got accused of Trump derangement syndrome, because I could totally relate to it, and I'm sure others have too. So just tell us that story.
Yeah, I know that's kind of a day in the life for you, but for me, that was a little bit of a new thing. I had talked more, Facebook, for better or worse, is kind of a mechanism that we use to talk with each other. And I have a lot of connections I've done a lot of things like, camps or working in different ministries or leading mission teams. And so I've got lots of people that I've known for like a week or two that I still want to stay in touch with. So that's a lot of my Facebook people. But I decided to be more vocal about Trump on Facebook because that is sort of the platform we use to discuss things. And I kind of have more and more progressively spoken my mind. And then, of course, with Substack and podcasts. And, the concern at the beginning was, for those of us who have grown up in church, there's a definite sense where people don't want you to rock the boat too much and respect authority and all those things. And so there's a lot of disincentives to talking about it. But so this particular one in question was just before the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill. And of course, there's a lot to dislike about the Big Beautiful Bill. But one of the main things for me was that it would remove health insurance for more than 12 million Americans who currently have it. And so my post said, and just like that, America has put its boot on the neck of those Jesus called us to care for. Is this greatness? So, yeah, a bit controversial, I suppose. My friend / acquaintance who I knew
and
from
a bit true.
Missions I'd led their mission team a couple times, said, your posts do nothing for the kingdom. They do nothing to inspire. Never thought you would be wielding such a divisive tone. I used to laugh at those who spoke of Trump derangement syndrome, but a man of your quality has allowed an obvious rabble-rouser to extract so much energy from you, makes me believe it's true.
One of the things that led me to oppose Trump, and I know from talking to you that you feel the same way, is that, a really important point that I want to make is that Donald Trump and his movement aren't just another legitimate buffet choice that a person can make in the political choices that we make. And it's like they've each got strong points and negative points, like that could be said about all politicians on one level, but there's something very different about Trump and his movement. And for me, it's that I believe that they're actually changing the very character of their followers. And I've seen it in people that I know. And I spent decades pastoring people. So I just find it alarming the way that people actually are being changed by following Trump. People that I know, people that I love. And I'm seeing people become more cynical, more of this ends justifies the means sort of talk. I see people accepting lying from their leaders in a way that they just never would have before. And I just see people generally taking on a harder edge, and even I see some cruelty seeping in. And you mentioned something when we were talking earlier about something you saw about just how people are starting to take on Trump's enemies or someone else's enemies as their own. Why don't you talk to me about that? Because I thought that was pretty profound.
There's a good quote here I'd like to read. Don't allow yourself to be recruited by someone to hate another person who hasn't wronged you. Only a fool inherits someone's enemies as a sign of loyalty. I think the only a fool may be a bit overstating it, but it's true. If you say, okay, so I'm going to follow Donald Trump is basically the most litigious person arguably that ever lived. He's somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 lawsuits that he's been either the suer or the suee or whatever, but he's just constantly in court, and he's making enemies all the time. So if you follow Trump and then you take on all of his enemies as your own, I've gone most of my life without really having any enemies. I have one or two people who are in the nebulous enemy category to me, who I don't think honestly are actually enemies. Why do I want to be opposed to essentially everybody who isn't a Trump voter? Because that's essentially what he's asking you to do, is to say, the left are so stupid, immigrants are ruining our country, there's the parasite class, you just go on and on and on, DEI is keeping your kids out of the good colleges. And so you take on all these things, and pretty soon you're angry with everyone. And it's like, well, what point does that serve?
Like, you listed some of the enemies that we're supposed to have now, and I could relate to it. Like, one thing that I've seen over the years is how a bunch of people, maybe not starting with John McCain, but he's the first big example I can think of where I think most people who voted Republican back when I used to would say John McCain is at least an American hero. And yeah, he had a sharp edge to him, probably partly due to all the years he spent in a prisoner of war camp. Right. But he had some firm convictions, and they would say, even if I disagree with him on some policies, I think he's an honorable guy. Donald Trump comes along and just despises McCain and says some just cruel things about him. And pretty soon, a whole bunch of people who used to respect John McCain, now they saw him as an enemy. And I've just seen that pattern play out over the years. I mean, you've seen that sort of thing, I'm sure, too.
One of the things that I think happens a lot, I'll talk about the list here. So the us and them, the who's in, who's out. So who's out, the left, we talk about, negative polarization. You go back and listen to Rush Limbaugh, and he's like, these people are so stupid. He'll say that 20 times a show, something like that. And talking about
I used to listen to him years ago.
What a bunch of complete morons. And so you listen to somebody saying that 20 times a day, 30 times a day over years and years. That's what is lodged. That's the placeholder that's lodged in your mind, So there's that. Then you got anything that smacks of big government or government waste, fraud, and abuse, Doge, the ill-fated program. So, then you can throw things like USAID, put them in the bad category because of that. It's big government handouts.
Yeah, and we're going to return to that in a few minutes.
Yeah, and you think about other countries. I mean, essentially, we're taking a punitive stance toward other countries. We're trying to tariff them because we're saying these countries have been ripping us off for so long, so we need to get back at them. We need to settle the score. We got to tariff them. We're going to restrict people coming in. We're going to cut down on immigration. We're trying to basically build a huge wall so people can't get in, and other than white South Africans, or people who can pay $5 million to get in. Those are the good people. But if you think about other countries, I never hear Trump say anything good about any country other than America, pretty much, other than maybe Israel sometimes. But I mean, if he talks about another country, it's always pejorative. So then you got immigrants, obviously. So that's kind of how Trump got in, was on, we need to crack down on immigration. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, they're murderers, they're rapists. I mean, it's just nonstop flow of, you'd think it's the worst of the worst people coming over in a giant, talking about invasion. So you can use the Alien Enemies Act. Then you think about minorities. So all the DEI stuff, minorities are taking your jobs, or, they're taking your kids' place at a top school is going to a minority, and it shouldn't. And so that's all, trying to erase their history, all this. The poor, that is the parasite class per Elon Musk. They're lazy, not hardworking, blah, blah, blah. And then you also get any conservatives who didn't vote for Trump. Like, I remember when Nikki Haley was running, he says, anyone who votes for Nikki Haley is out of MAGA forever. So here's the list of people we don't like. The left, anything that smacks of big government, other countries, immigrants, minorities, the poor, any conservatives who didn't vote for Trump. So what you have left is the people who voted for Trump. Those are the only good, smart, intelligent people. And so you've made an us and them, and the them is like literally the entire rest of the world who doesn't think the way you do about this guy has taken over our country. It's wild.
Yeah,
it is crazy.
It is crazy. And it's also what's helped me is to think of this in terms of a system, because this relates to the work that I'm doing right now this summer, where I'm doing a long series that I'm just at the beginning of it on fascism, and just looking at how do the ways that we understand fascism relate to the MAGA movement. And this is one of the prime ones. It's the whole us, them. Jason Stanley's book is called How Fascism Works, the Politics of Us versus Them. That's like at the core of fascist ideology. And so I don't even want to call it ideology. It's at the core of fascist tactics, is to identify enemies and rally your people against those enemies. And so in that way, it's like, it's wild when we see it, but it's also understandable because it's a pattern we've seen for years. Trump does this. The enemy is the galvanizing force, right, to the movement. Like if the friend-enemy distinction.
Right. The juice to the movement is that we have somebody that we're fighting against, and someone who poses an existential threat to whatever it is they pose an existential threat to, But if you don't, and that's why, you think of this as like, it's not a constructive movement, because it's talking about, it's a movement of defense. Like these people are attacking us and we need to go on the defensive, but he's not talking about like building anything. Like when you cut 12 million people off Medicaid, there's no like, oh, and here's how we're going to fix that. And here's how we're not going to be the most uninsured first world nation in the world. It's just like, no, these people need to be cut off. And there's no improving of things or making things better, which is why I view this as being just very destructive. And especially when the enemies that you are creating you're making them to be more significant than they are, because that's how you galvanize the movement. And trumped up is kind of a pun in this case, but it's true. You trump up the notion of a threat and make it more significant than
and again, this, just to bring it back to our theme, when we get accused of Trump derangement syndrome, what I'm trying to point out, and what you're trying to point out here, is that there are very real concerns that we have, and to point them out is not deranged. It's actually, and the main concerns that I'm focusing in on today, and some of the questions I'm asking you, have to do with these things about how it's changing the very character of the people who support Trump. I just want to return to that as a theme, because another thing that I noticed in that comment that you that you received is that I felt like you were almost being mocked for having emotions about what's happening to your country and to your friends and family. And I want to point out that that is a really common tactic that the far right uses in the debate. Did you see that debate that Mehdi Hassan had with 20 far right?
I didn't. No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's people should watch that if you want to understand some of this stuff, because several of those people, when they were talking to Mehdi Hassan, and he was just intelligently critiquing, and he would cut them off if they were trying to take it in some weird direction. He'd cut them off and return it to the question at hand and stuff. And so a lot of them just said, "Well, you seem really emotional, Mehdi. You should try to calm down. Yeah. When he's just speaking, intelligently to them. And that's a tactic, this tactic of calm down, you're too emotional. And sometimes they'll use things, you hear phrases like toxic empathy. You hear phrases like how it's somehow a feminine thing, and that being a feminine thing is somehow a bad thing to be emotional, when human beings are emotional, other than I think maybe some kinds of sociopaths might not be. But so talk to me about what's that?
Well, there's also, this is making me think a lot about, Trump talks a lot about common sense. Well, this is just a common sense thing to do, and the notion of common sense sounds like someone who's very calm and sensible.
Right.
Like, I can think of people that I think have a lot of common sense, and they're just generally very practical, not easily rattled. They're good in a situation. They just got to know what to do. And so you call it common sense, and then you do these things that are really destructive and harmful, but you're calling it common sense before you do it. And then I think that sets people's expectations, especially if they're already likely to agree with you on this thing, to say, well, this is a common sense thing to do. Why are you getting so worked up about this? And I'm like, this is absolutely not a common sense thing to do. At some point we'll get into talking about the USAID thing. And that being cast that way, and I'm seeing it from a different perspective, and helping them.
And I liked recently how you framed this up when you were talking about just some of the normal good emotions that people feel. And by the way, I'm just going to say Trump, Elon Musk, just look at the fight that those two had, and then try to tell me that somehow they're not acting in emotion. Trump acts on emotion all the time. But anyway, I thought you talked really well about this recently when you were talking about your attachment or our attachment to things, and how it's actually a way to understand some appropriate kinds of emotions. Why don't you go into that a little bit? Because I think that was helpful.
Yeah. So I thought about, I am someone who, I have a collection of guitars, which is over there. And I also really like Volvos. So I had a Volvo station wagon a long time ago, and I always wanted to get another one. Now I got one, and it's been really a pain to get parts for. And it's causing me trouble, but it's totally something. It's a choice that I made, that I brought on myself. It's only kind of really affecting me, and so it's one of those things that, like, my attachment to it is at a certain level. Like, it's at a level of nostalgia. I feel good when I get in it and drive it. I'm Swedish. It's Swedish. There's a thing. Yeah. But I could sell it and get another car, and I'd be sad about it for a couple of days, but it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Right. So then same, guitar, similar kind of thing. Right. Now you think about, go up to the notion of having a family farm, maybe you're the third generation running a family farm. And I know I grew up in farm country and a lot of farmers, and you see farms getting sold off all the time, and you say farm auction here, and somebody's going to come out and somebody's going to take home the combine, and somebody else is going to take home the tractor. And they're just, it's like stripping a car and selling the parts kind of thing. Right. And you think about how much, blood, sweat, and tears has been sunk into that place by previous generations. And one of the things I always hear from younger farmers is, I don't want to be the one who loses it. Like, I would like to be able to pass it on, to the next generation. And they know what it means. Like, they know that farms are how we get fed, and they view farming as a very honorable profession. And it's a thing that's been handed down to them. And there's kind of a sacredness to it, really. And it's their ancestral homeland too, to put it another way. And so there's a huge piece of themselves that's in it. And if that is lost, then that's going to be a loss of a much greater magnitude than me selling my Volvo because I get sick of trying to source parts for it. Now you go up to something like our country. It's like all of us build our lives, the way we structure our families, our towns, the way that my business runs, the way that your church runs when you're a pastor, just the way we think about the nature of our relationships is because this is what we know our country to be. This is like a bedrock of our life. And so, when you're looking at business, and part of the reason that tariffs were so bad is that, like, you just don't have any idea what to expect the business situation to be. And so people can't make educated decisions because the tariff might be 0% or it might be 75% or 135% 2 years from now. So how do you can't factor that in. And you just look at all the uncertainty that's being created in our country. I mean, on every level. I mean, just on what's the nature of cancer funding going to look like? How do we treat the people who are the them? Are we, I mean, just literally, you take it on the economic, you take it on the spiritual level, you take it on the healthcare level, you take it on the relationships level, and everything is in maximum upheaval. I mean, I can't think of how one person, if you were to try to send in one person to uproot all of those things, uproot the things that we thought we knew about all those things, the things that we kind of base our lives on in many ways as Americans, and to just uproot all that, and especially in the name of going back to something that a fictitious Gilded Age in the past, that it's really, and that's the thing that is rattling around in my head all the time, that I can't, it's hard to convey to someone else who doesn't want to hear that or isn't willing to have that level of a discussion,
Yeah, and bringing it back to this idea of emotion, it's like, if you feel the loss of these things that you find beautiful and that you find stabilizing even, and you try to express that and then get labeled as reacting out of emotion, you've got Trump derangement syndrome because you don't like to see these things happen. I just think it changes our character if we're taught, especially, I hear this from a lot of conservative Christians. I hear it from Christian nationalists for sure, but I hear it from a lot of conservative Christians that somehow, we shouldn't be led by our emotions. And it's like, I'm not being led by my emotions, but I have emotions. I get angry when I see the destructive things that are happening. And when I see how people are being affected, I get angry about that. I get sad.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think I want to be able to talk about those things without being labeled as somehow Trump is living rent free in my head. No, he's the president of our country, and he's backed by a movement that has a plan for reshaping the way things work in a major way that I think is doing damage to a lot of people. And by supporting that, a lot of people are getting hardened. They're becoming a weapon that he can use.
Yeah, and it breaks down the notion of a person as being a holistic entity, Like, if you say the notion that we are just rational actors, rational animals, 100% at all times emotionless, that's not a good thing to be. That's right. That's how you raise a perfect killing machine, is you to drain all emotion out of them. I mean, it's not, that isn't ultimately, you're not being fully human if that's how you're living. Right. And And as you said, there are times to be emotional. I mean, if you think of a farmer who very much did not want to, but loses his farm and has to put it up for sale, that's going to haunt them the rest of their lives, honestly. And that's a very understandable thing. Like, that is, if they, and the thing is, if they pretend that that's not happening, they're not going to be fully human in a way, because they're not acknowledging a huge part of their lives that has changed and a huge loss. And so if you actually have emotions, like most people do, and you think that you're not supposed to have them, then you tamp them down, and that never goes well. And so that's, in a sense, that's kind of what we're all being asked to do. We're all being asked to suppress a vital piece of ourselves so that we can pretend all this stuff is okay. And I think if you do that over time, it's kind of habit forming. I mean, you'll get better and better at doing that, but you'll get colder and harder and more calculating and caring less about other people. And if you go back to what Christ asked us to do, that's pretty much the opposite of what Christ is asking us to do.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I do want to say that when you talk about these things, though, what comes up to my mind, again, as somebody who's studying fascism and fascist movements, is that those same emotions you're talking about, there's a version of that is actually right at the heart of the appeal that fascists have when they take over. They play to similar emotions. They play to emotions around feeling a sense of loss of culture. Take the family farm and expand that. Use this is our homeland. This whole blood and soil thing. These are our people, and this is our land. That's the way fascists take these natural things and they twist them. And it's like, and I feel like on the one hand, it's one of the difficulties is that they're playing to things that are just deep inside of us. But it's also one of the ways, if we understand that and we think about how you and I feel like we're losing something beautiful about this country right now, and we can if we tap into some empathy here, we can relate to how other people who might follow Trump are feeling some of those emotions, but they're being twisted, they're being manipulated, they're being sold a false history, a mythology. That's a fascist tactic.
Yeah.
And they're being, and the worst aspects, like let's talk about USAID, because I think it's an example of that's a good impulse that you see, and a way that our government has done some good in the world. So it's like you feel a loss of something that you see as very positive that we were doing together as a country, as opposed to, I feel the loss of this being a white country where we all believed the same thing. And, so just talk about that.
Yeah. Well, so USAID, I think when people accuse you of Trump derangement syndrome, it's helpful to go back and kind of to tether to actual things that are going on in the world, and what are the actual consequences of these policies. Like what I just talked about was very, with the family farm and losing country and sense of identity. I mean, it's real, but it's not super tangible, right? So defunding USAID, the rationale was that this is waste. There's it's a huge amount of corruption. It's a huge amount of money that's being spent. We're funding this play in Peru with a transgender character, and it's evil and it needs to be shut down, right? So, and I mean, Elon Musk also said the same thing about Lutheran Social Services, which is one of the main adoption agencies that helps the pro-life movement do the pro-life thing of when the baby is born, then it gets adopted to the family. So, you got to take this with a grain of salt, right? But in practical terms, and this is important to me because I have traveled quite a bit, and I've been to Africa a couple times. There's a clinic there in Kazangula, Zambia, that's named after my son. That's a maternal child health clinic that I went over there to help establish. And just as a preamble to this story, I met a village chief there in Zambia there's a district in Zambia that's 70,000 people, and they have a space that is about twice the size of my studio here. It would be my studio plus another one, and that is the healthcare for 70,000 people. and there's no ambulance service. Most people don't have cars.
Wow.
You walk there, you bike there, you get somebody to give you a ride, you get on a bus, and there's no waiting room. When you get there, there's a lean-to it's a dirt wall and then a dirt floor with metal across it, and you crawl to get in there, and there's space for about 15 people to sit in the dirt. And there's a guy who runs the clinic there, and he works 16 to 18 hours a day. There's one doctor, and that is the facility. One half of it is where they keep all the medicines, and the other half is one exam room for 70,000 people. So this village chief, his daughter was sick in the middle of the night, and they don't have a car or anything. And so it's 4 miles to get to the clinic, and he picks up his daughter, and he starts carrying her like this, just carrying her. And they walk along the river, and he's risking crocs and hippos and lions. I mean, all sorts of things could be out there to eat, snakes, and he's literally carrying his daughter 4 miles, and they sit down on a plastic chair in front of the clinic, and he doesn't want to try to wake up the doctor because he knows that he works, 20 hours a day kind of thing. And his daughter dies in his arms while he's sitting outside the clinic.
Oh, wow.
Because they have no health care. And so that was like one of those light bulb moments. That was like one of these aha moments. Of like, that is what healthcare is like in rural Zambia. Right. And so USAID is trying to,
right.
The notion of USAID of cutting it is saying like, these countries should do this for themselves. Well, they can't, they won't. This is what happens when these countries do it for themselves. Right. So when we cut USAID, those are the populations that we're hurting. We're hurting at-risk kids. We're hurting people who are HIV positive, and that's going to spread. And, moms who are HIV positive, and that's going to spread to their children, to their babies. And there's an easy, cheap treatment for that will prevent that from happening. All this stuff, mosquito nets for malaria, none of that is going to happen. 25.3 million people are going to die over the next 15 years if we fully just cut USAID. That is equivalent to the populations of Wyoming, Vermont, North Dakota, Alaska, South Dakota, Delaware, Rhode Island, Montana, New Hampshire, Maine, Hawaii, West Virginia, Idaho, Nebraska, New Mexico, Mississippi, and Kansas. All those people are actively dying because we're saving 0.3% of our federal budget. That's what USAID is.
Right.
0.3% of our federal budget. And when we pass the big, beautiful bill, it actually raises the deficit. It actually increases the deficit. So we're kicking 12 million Americans off of our health insurance, but then we're also leaving 25.3 million people, 25 million people to die who would not have had to. And so it's like, but how do you think about this? Do you think about this as like, well, they don't deserve our help, right? You could think about it that way, or you could think, well, our government spends too much anyway. And I'm like, if you can't wrap your head around saving 25 million people, and that's going to cost 0.3% of the federal budget, I don't know what moral universe you're living in, I don't know how you, but also like, because I've been there and because I've met people who would be affected by this, like, it's very personal. It's very close to me. Same with defunding cancer research. Like I'm a cancer survivor, and I'm in this group of 3,500 men and like, I know people whose clinical trials got canceled, or they didn't get into it in the first place because these funds were lost. And that's, for a lot of people, like that's their last hope. So these are very real things that are happening. And so it's changing us as people. It's making us harder. It's making us more cynical. But I mean, people will literally die because of this. Right.
Yeah. There's the impacts on, that we've been talking about, where we're concerned about what it does to Trump's followers to support this sort of thing. But you're right. I mean, very real people are not just being harmed, people are dying because of these decisions. These are choices we're making. And I want to, I'm going to head us towards wrapping this up here. But I want to do that by just reiterating that a lot of this is about it's meant to reshape specifically the way Christians think about government. There's this, it's an ideology that's being put out there that's saying, they'll say that this is about the money. Oh, we're saving this, like you just point out, 0.3% of the budget. They'll talk about it as though it's about the money and we can't afford to help these. It's not about the money. It's an ideological thing. That's why they throw in the things that they try to capture Christians, certain Christians with about, they're doing this left-wing thing in this specific program. But what they're really trying to do is to reshape the nature of what it means to be a Christian in the public sphere, and that's something that I've fallen for. I grew up as a child in the 80s. I was a Reagan Republican before I could even vote. And what I want to point out here is that if we're going to have any sort of involvement, if Christians are to have any sort of involvement in politics, this is a major change for me over the last bunch of years from what I've seen as I've opened up. What I think is, well, what is an acceptable form of religion? James 1:27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Okay, what's the thing there that is that's something we can do together? That's looking after orphans and widows in their distress. If Christians are going to be involved in politics, it's like, well, government is made for this sort of thing, to cooperate on helping, to cooperate on pooling resources and directing them towards things that we agree as a nation are important. We want to help, through USAID. And again, there's so many practical reasons to support USAID, also just strategic interest. We don't even need to get into that today. But that's the sort of thing, if Christians say, I want to mobilize as a Christian politically, well, God the Father accepts as pure and faultless, looking after orphans and widows in their distress. And then it says, keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Keep oneself. And right-wing Christians, which is what I was, I didn't use that term, but I recognize that's what I was for the first bunch of years of my voting life, get that completely backwards. They say we're going to keep other people from being polluted by the world through moral laws or whatever. We're going to make sure this nation is not polluted by the world morally, and we're going to band together to do that. But when it comes to looking after orphans and widows, do that yourself. Make sure oneself looks after orphans and widows. And I just think it's just completely backwards. And it's one of the major changes that I've had in my own approach to politics. And I think the MAGA movement is desperately trying to tell that other story to Christians, to weaponize them against the sorts of helping things, against the other, and to use their force to make sure nobody's polluted by the world.
Right.
So I don't know what you think of that.
It's a very cynical, like a social, what they're actually proposing is much more of like a social Darwinist, framework of like right makes right. If you have the power, good for you. If you don't, too bad. Evolution's going to weed out the weak and the weak and the vulnerable.
Right.
And, you think about who's losing out in all this. It's people who need help. It's people who need help for some reason. They're getting labeled as the parasite class, or they're getting labeled as, like immigrants who are coming here for very, you could talk about immigration and like push and pull factors. I mean, you hear about some of the push factors are, there was a guy down in Venezuela and he had a couple daughters and one was 13 years old and she was unusually beautiful. And the local gang said, we're going to take this 13-year-old girl to be our collective boyfriend, right? For the local gang. And so then the father says, well, what do I do? Because I'm powerless to stop that if we stay here. But if I leave, then we have to try to take our whole family and try to go to the US, and that's going to be like 1,000 miles on foot. Like, we're literally leaving everything. But like, what choice do you have? What choice can you make? So like in that particular story, the father and the 13-year-old take off for the US, and the mother and the other kids who weren't in danger stay back there. And that is how they as a family tried to navigate that. But the thing is, if we're only told that all immigrants are bad and it's legal or illegal, and there's only it's a switch that's on or off, and you got to do it the right way, it's like, well, what about actual people and the actual conditions that people find themselves in? And if you as a parent face that decision, what do you do? If you look at it like that, it changes the whole metric. Like you're saying, if you look at it that way, you're saying this man is doing an incredibly honorable and brave and sacrificial thing when enforced with an impossible decision. And it's a complete, and that's actually the thing that's happening, like as opposed to if you have the grid in your mind that they tell you this is how to see the world, right? This is how you should look at things. This is how to see the world. And if you bring that to every situation, you put that grid on top of it, and you don't see that person as a person. You see him as a thing and as a problem and as someone who shouldn't have come here, and that's all part of it. And I think that's the thing, that you take that, but then you just magnify that to every person that you ever meet. The guy who strangles the nurse with her hijab because she's Muslim or whatever, that's just becomes the way that you see the world. And that's just a fundamentally broken and wrong and un-Christ-like way to see the world.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll kind of finish it up by just saying that what you just described, it would be very fair to say, well, that's the way the world has always been. People have always been racist or afraid of immigrants or selfish or whatever kinds of negative things you want to put on it. You could say the world has always been that way. What's different, the reason that I oppose Donald Trump, that I've given years to oppose him now as a Christian, as a former pastor, is because he is qualitatively different in the way that he approaches leadership, where he takes these things that we used to consider vices or weaknesses or just bad ways of thinking, and he says, it's common sense. Like you pointed out before, it's common sense. We look out for our own. And they refer to people like you and I who try to just raise our hand and say, wait, aren't we supposed to care about such and such? They call us social justice warriors. If we say that we have problems with how Trump is doing this and how he's damaging the conscience of his followers and reshaping the way Christians think about this, we're told we have Trump derangement syndrome. And I just think that's it's a way of dismissing it. But what's frustrating is a slogan like that. Slogans like that can cost 3 years. They can cost 7 years in terms of the cultural debate. And it's like, don't let them work. Don't let those slogans work. When somebody 100%. Comes at us with slogans like that, I just want to encourage people, just brush it off and talk about whatever it is. Adam and I talked about a few specific things here, but if you're opposing Donald Trump, there's a reason you're opposing him. And don't be put off by stupid slogans like this, but find a way to get at the meat of what you see happening. Tell stories like Adam just told of a few people. Tell your own stories, and let's humanize the conversation a little bit, because what's happening is not good, and it's different from what's happened in my lifetime in America, but it's not different from what's happened around the world. These are tactics and strategies that have been used for many, many years, and we can learn from them. But we got to be able to call it out without being told we have Trump derangement syndrome. So thanks, Adam. Thanks for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'm glad to be on, and thanks for doing what you're doing. I know you're fighting the good fight, and it's not without cost. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, same with you. Yeah. And so thank you. Thanks for this. And thanks everyone for listening.